Where did your journey and desire to practice in the mental health space come from?
Well, I had a career after college. I had a business career. I worked for a consulting firm, and there was a lot that I liked about that. There was a lot that I liked. There were things I didn't. I wanted more direct contact with people, and I wanted to just know more about how humans work. I didn't know anything. Like I don't know anything about cars, and I'd like to, but not enough that I'm going to go do that. Apparently, but
Hmm.
I didn't know about how people function, and I did want to understand more. So I had all of this inside of me, but I felt like I couldn't go do it. Like I was like 24, but when I was in my mid 20s, and to go change careers, the thought was I have to go back to college and take a year of science. I didn't have any science, so I'm gonna leave a job that's a pretty good job. I'm gonna pay for a year, right, of school again, and then I won't really make a good salary for like another 9 years, right? And it seemed like, oh, how could I do that? Like I didn't understand. Of course I could do that. Like I was healthy, and like I had the wherewithal in me to do it, right? It wasn't that I couldn't do it. It was that I was so afraid and ashamed. Oh, I'm going to change career paths. What will people think? And sure enough, when I did leave, people did say that, like, oh my gosh, you must be crazy, right? You're not going to make any money for 10 years, right? But like, it's okay, right? I'm still here, right? I survived without making much money for 10 years, right? But I didn't understand that. And it was the environment I was living in where people were like, oh my God, how could you do that? Right. But here's the truth of it. Once I was doing it, and I was leaving. It wasn't that I was leaving for medical school. It was that I was leaving to do something I really wanted to do against some of this imposed shame that people started to ask me, how are you doing that? I want to do that too. I
Hmm.
want another job. I want another career. I want to work less. So I was right about how the environment reacted to me. What I didn't understand at the time is that we were all acting in a way that was false, right? Like this is the greatest thing to do, and we have to keep doing it, and it's successful, right? And we're being successful, and we're working hard. Like we can't stop it when many, many, many of us wanted to stop it. Like so this was all swirling around inside of me, and then after the loss of my brother to suicide, that it was I mean, it just brought everything to a head for me, and that's when I realized, hey, it's not that you're so old, you're 20 something and you can't do anything now. It's that you're only 20 something. Like, just go do that thing you want to do, right? Go work at that. Don't think, oh, I'm not going to make a good income for 10 years. Think, I'm going to choose what I do tomorrow. And that's got to make tomorrow okay, whether I'm making income or not, right? And
Yeah.
it's that led me to reassess everything from a very different perspective. It brought it all to a head and gave me the internal clarity to see what was true that I couldn't see before that loss.
I'm very sorry to hear about your brother. I wasn't aware of that. I come from a community of people where I don't want to say it's an epidemic of suicide because it's not, but I will say that it is statistically above the norm in many other communities, but probably similar to first responder. And it's a topic that I have talked about with many of previous people that I served with. And I've yet to be able to come to any level of understanding why it is so much higher in the community of people that I used to work with, unless it has something to do with the isolation or, like you mentioned, the shame or the unwillingness of wanting to share or reach out because of how people may view it. And it's led me to deeper questions along the way. And I'd be curious your thoughts on this. You know, a lot of times when people look at veteran suicide, they only look at what happened in service, things they might have been exposed to in the service.
Right.
And what I didn't realize until recently in having conversations with people that I used to work with, because we never used to sit around and be like, oh, hey, tell me about your childhood.
Right.
Like, oh, we never talked about what happened before the military.
Right.
And so somebody who kills themselves after they serve in the military, of course, horrible loss of life, and it has just such profound impact on the family. But I wonder if people, what I've noticed, and I'd be curious your thoughts on this, I have actually found that a large percentage of people that I used to work with actually came from traumatic backgrounds and upbringings. And I'm curious if the job was more enticing to them because of that, because they could do something with that trauma, or was a way for them to not pass it along. And then you still have to deal with it at the end, right? So there's this bridge of in between where you had this occupation. You're still left with the before trauma and then the after.
Right.
I don't know. To me, and again, I'm kind of just thinking in real time, but to me, the veteran suicide issue is much more, it's deeper than just what happened in service. And that seems to be what people are focusing on. I'm just curious your thoughts if to people, Would you ever see a connection from somebody who comes from a traumatic background looking for a job or wanting to be more enticed by a job in that special operations community because of what
Sure.
they do?
Yeah, absolutely yes. Absolutely yes. And I'll say, I think when it comes to mental health, the basic concepts are almost always simple. The devil's in the details, right? It's the part of really understanding it that's complex. But usually, if we look for what's the simple premise that's telling us what to anchor ourselves to, and I think what you're describing links to two factors. And I think this is true of anything that really, really pushes a person, right? So joining the military, special forces, really pushing a person, right? But same in many ways is true to people who go into healthcare, right? If someone's going to go to medical school is understands they're pushing themselves, right? There's a selection for people. Same thing with mountain climbers. Same thing in many ways with first responders. I mean, there are jobs that pay the same amount of money and don't involve showing up on the scene when someone's been shot, right? So why
Yep.
show up on the scene when someone has been shot? Why do the things that we're talking about? There's a pushing of self. Someone says, I want to help people, I want to protect people, right? And I see that in order to do that in the way maybe I want to do it, you have to really push yourself, right? So now there's an alliance between I want to do good in the world and I'm going to push myself, right? And a lot of the reasons people push themselves is to try and feel good enough, right? The suicide rates in physicians are higher too, for example, because
Hmm.
we're talking about the same characteristics in people across these disciplines, right? Which is there's something going on inside of me, and I mean it's not always this, but it's predisposed. It selects for people who want to overcome something. I'll feel good enough when I have that medical degree. I'll feel good enough when I've been able to save X number of people when I so many people when I go out in the ambulance, right, to see them. I'll feel good enough when I protected people by, doing some dangerous military exercise, right? Like it makes sense, right? But there's something to prove to the self as well, which not always, but very often goes back to childhood trauma. So when you say these things, my brain goes, of course, right? Because trauma early on in life affects us the most, right? So no one's joining the military before age 15, right? So right, that's
18,
when
yeah.
most of the
No, yeah.
trauma is occurring. That's setting the stage for what happens afterward. So if you look at why is this person having troubles, right? Or why is it made this person have trouble, right? Whether again, I'm just making the parallel of like extreme sports, military, medicine, or in any of these situations, you have to go look at the selection bias for people that have been through some childhood trauma in those formative years, single digit years up until mid-teens, right? That makes that person want to go out and prove something to themselves, and that person's going to push themselves farther, right? They're going to be able to achieve a lot, but they're also much more likely to not know, like, when should I feel good enough and when should I feel ashamed, right? And that's why you see people who say, want to make money to protect other people, and
Hmm.
now they've made vast amounts of money and it doesn't feel good like enough, right? Because if you don't go back and look at yourself, enough is never enough, right? Because you don't go back to what the original problem. If a person can identify, my issue has been, for example, lack of resources when I was growing up, and I've wanted to earn money to protect people. As just one example, that person's got to go look at where that came from and how they've changed things for other people. Otherwise, it's stuffed in the background. Too much is never enough. Person has vast amounts of money, loses a little bit of it, and feels like a failure. Right? So it's a
Yeah.
selection bias, and then also the training systems, as we just talked about, train us to shove down things. Nobody wants to hear that, right? Nobody wants to hear the doctor or the special forces person, right, say like, "Hey, I'm feeling really sad and down or hurt. Like it was hard what I saw." Like people are just put your head down and keep doing your job. Like that's precisely what gets us into trouble.